Welcome to Compound Insights, a podcast by CFA Society New York. I'm your host, Rob Rowan. Today we're in our latest episode of Commercial Real Estate Month with Scott Galin. He's been a principal and CEO of Handrow Properties and ESSH Investments. He oversees the properties, limited partnerships, the brokerage division, and some of the financing and acquisition for these organizations. Prior to Handrow, he helped build and run his 600-store family retail business, G&G, rising to president and CEO. He has a BS in finance from New York University and has served as a member of the board of directors of the Fashion District BID and is a regional board member of the Anti-Defamation League. So, Scott, welcome to the podcast.
Nice to be here. Thank you.
I think it makes sense to start with a difficult, seemingly simple question. Is that you have a lot of exposure to B office space.
Yes.
And how are you and your partners expecting that portfolio to return over time, and how do you forecast it?
Well, interesting, because if you'd asked me this question a year ago, I would have given you a very different answer.
Mhm.
But the last 6 to 9 months, we have seen a meaningful improvement in activity, both through our ownership buildings and through our third-party brokerage doing a lot of business in other buildings that are comparable. And my brethren would say the same thing if they were here today. We do compare notes and we chat, and the last 9 months have been good. There's no other way to put it. The work from home notion, as I'll call it, is as predicted, sort of melting away. We can tell in our properties that 75% of the personnel are there 4 or 5 days a week. And as I said, the first week of the pandemic, when I was interviewed about, population in the offices, I said, you are starting with a false premise of 100%. Said, I built and ran companies. I said on boards, I had a company with 300 people in an office, and there wasn't a day you could come up there and there'd be 300 people.
Right.
If we got to 80% on an average day with vacations and people were ill and personal days, so let's start with 80% as a base. And if we're at 66% now, it sounds like, we're more like 75% of pre-pandemic.
Okay. Yeah, that is exceptionally interesting. I think that a lot of people are believing two of the headlines that they see. One is that the office market is dead, and the other one's no one is ever going back to the office again. So thank you for quelling both of those right off the top.
Wrong and wrong.
Right.
More and more people are going back to the office every day, mostly because they're told to. But I think there's a big constituency of younger people who had enough, with the apartment, and for a year or 2 or 3, it was okay. And so even personally, I know a lot of young people who are told to be in an office 3 days a week, and they're in an office 4 or 5 days a week. Part of it is because other people are, and that's what will happen in an organization.
Right.
You need to put eyes on corner offices.
Uh-huh.
And number 2, they enjoy the esprit de corps, and that's part of running a business. And that was what was principally wrong with the whole model to begin with. But we needed to do it for a very significant reason.
Right. Now, so let's talk a little bit about measuring those things. So I presume you're measuring the office usage by swipes?
Yes. Well, first by occupancy. Obviously, if we have vacancy, there's
Right.
nobody occupying it.
Right.
Well, there was a time when there was meaningful vacancy. Now we have 95%, economic occupancy, as we call it in the real estate business. And we do measure it by swipes and also by anecdotals, because, not everyone has a swipe card in every place because they may be an independent contractor or so forth. But we also do weekly reports by building where staff, sort of reports in and gives us some anecdotes. But I would say that we probably have 75 to 85% of the pre-pandemic population in these buildings now. That's the best I can put it. People go, well, Fridays are quiet. Fridays have been quiet for the 45 years I've worked. I've worked all the Fridays, but that's what tends to happen, especially during summer and holiday time. It's not much different than it was pre-pandemic, and you can see by looking out buildings at the dark this time of year, and you can look in other buildings and you see lights, like I do at home in my apartment. I know who's home in the neighboring buildings. It's very simple. So I think vastly improved. Now, in terms of rent, if that's a different conversation. That's going to take a bit to get back up.
Right. And that kind of circles back to my initial question is, what are you forecasting, particularly for rents?
Well, I mean, I think for the first 2, 3 years of the pandemic, when people were starting to come back after a couple of years, and they thought, okay, we're going to beat the owner senseless, and we took it for a while, and now there's pushback, and so rents are certainly better than they were a year and a half ago. Whether they'll get back up to where they were pre-pandemic, I'm not certain. I think that's going to take a bit. It's going to be supply and demand. As you know, very little is in the ground office-wise that wasn't in the ground already with the
Right.
pandemic.
Right.
When you can go through the few buildings, there's just no new office stock coming. So, and there are just so many tenants that can pay $90 to $140 and be in these 5-star A buildings, not our constituency. So they have a certain subset of properties they can go to. And so hopefully the lack of supply and the increased demand will assist in the long run.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about conversions anyway, right?
Okay.
So because there's a lot of everyone thinks about this in terms of housing, but but what's your sort of, when you look at conversions from an investment perspective, how do you look at them?
With not with rose-colored glasses.
Okay.
I mean, on paper, certain things sound wonderful. Too much office, too little housing. Turn office to housing. Voila. Sounds like a great idea, except in principle, it's very, very, very hard to pencil out. I've been through symposiums and Rebony meetings, and it works in certain places. I have friends and colleagues and investment partners that are doing this and have done it, except that unless your building is suitable for it physically, and you have light and air, and you're able to make this conversion, stay in this the long term, it's very hard to pencil out, especially when the municipality is demanding, affordable housing for anything they're going to throw into the pot, which just makes it more challenging. So I think downtown there's going to be more than Midtown for sure, because some of those buildings are way more conducive physically
Yes.
to doing it.
Right.
And but I think by and large it will happen in X amount of buildings, and it'll be a meaningful amount. But I don't think from a percentage wise it'll be a meaningful amount.
Right. Well, this is one of the things that once again, I'm far from a real estate expert, but I'm pretty good at arithmetic. Arithmetic tells me that very few, if any, of these conversions in the current setup could be affordable.
I think without tremendous state, federal, local assistance, and that could come in many, many ways. Yeah. And even if you got the assistance, it's coming mostly in tax abatements. So you still need the money up front. No one's handing you the money. Mm-hmm. So you have to have deep pockets. The people that are doing these things, and some of them are my friends and colleagues, are very substantial organizations with long-term views, incredibly well capitalized, because this is not going to be an exercise for a 3-year ROI return.
Right.
So I think it'll be relegated to institutional and just sub-institutional players, mm-hmm. and to areas and particularly buildings that make some sense.
Right. Okay. So, let's move on to that, because this is where the other thing that's being a little tricky for the market is that the commercial real estate lending market is evolving dramatically. So,
and I'm not so sure I'd use the word evolve. I might
declining.
Declined.
Yeah, declined.
Yeah. I think right now it's stagnant, but declined dramatically.
Okay, so let's talk about stagnation and where we go from here, because once again, the stead that you have here makes it exceptionally interesting to get your view about where we're headed. So, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, this is sort of the $30,000 question. The banks lent money at great rates as a result of what the Fed funds rate were for years and years and years, and they lent that money based on appraisals of buildings and LTVs. And now with what's gone on, there's been blanket reappraisals of every portfolio in New York and draconian reductions in what they are. So when one looks at, their principal balance and looks at doing anything, refinancing it, moving it, the big problem becomes, even if it was modestly leveraged, before the pandemic, 30, 40, 40, 50, 55, that wasn't considered over levered. Now that 50 could look like 90,
Right.
based on an appraisal.
Right.
And so that requires people, to go deep in their pockets and add to the equity on the balance sheet to make this math work. And so far, there hasn't been a lot of people doing that. And, hopefully, when the market gets a little more active, there'll be more mark to market and we can deal with these appraisals. But the banks are having to deal with, tremendous regulatory issues. And a lot of this they can't do anything about. They used to have way more malleability to deal with problems individually, and now that's not the case. There's been a big, three of the biggest lenders in the B space, office and or multifamily in New York are wiped off the face of the earth effectively, and that makes it very, very, very difficult in that space. And institutional players never loved that business to begin with. They did CMBS loans, and the life cos are skittish. I hope that as the market gets better and the buildings get filled and the rents go up, there's sort of a change in heart and regulatory issues, and maybe that's actually possible. So not so far down the road, but a bit down the road, this becomes a somewhat easier task, but it is a very, very large issue.
Okay. So, my impression once again, an external person from the industry is there's some private equity money shaking around a little bit. Do you think that presents a risk to the long run health of the industry, despite the fact there's just no money around? Is the shift in the rancor for getting money from those folks at any terms necessary risky for the industry?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about debt, there's a lot of alternative debt
Yes.
vehicles right now, and you want money, there's money.
But
Yeah, but I mean, this money comes with, different, arrangements than from a bank would, and covenants and lots more tripwires. And so, yeah, I mean, this is, the mezz lending business is a different business. And I'm invested in some of these things. We don't own any mezz debt, but we're invested in properties that have had to do that. And, it's certainly makes things more challenging and, in some regards, lowers your percent for success because it's burdensome. Now, that's the business they're in. It's fair enough. There's no problem with that. I have lots of mezz friend lenders, but so the money's out there. There's no doubt about that. But again, with rents being down, expenses being up, not variable, uncontrollable things like real estate taxes and utilities. And so you have fixed expenses that are going up. You have rents that have come down meaningfully over the last 5 years. And debt costs, even traditional debt costs, just the rate alone, is measurably more than what you're coming out of. So throw some mezz debt on top of all that, and very challenging.
Well, I guess one of the things that I'm exceptionally curious, because you have a very long view of New York City real estate. One of the things that I think is exceptionally interesting is New York had this, was the first one to the renaissance of the cities. And you saw it all over the place. This wobbled a little bit. COVID wasn't great to the city. There's some other problems. So in retail, commercial, multifamily, it's all evolving. Where do you see that going?
I'm super bullish on New York, and I'm way the wrong person to ask because 3 months into COVID, when this looked like a ghost town, and I was in my office every day, walking home up an empty Madison Avenue with no stores open, forget about occupied. And, I was the one telling everybody this, New York comes back. And just wait till a vaccine. There was no vaccine. I said, give me a vaccine and this city will be back where it was, if not better. And I would say today, if you had somebody who went to sleep for 4 years and you woke them up today and they lived in Manhattan and you told them go about your business, it'd be very hard for anybody now to tell that there was a pandemic. Whether it's restaurants that are full, apartment buildings that are full, traffic, every other metric count, eyeball you can put on, this city is back. There are some collateral issues that are unique to the pandemic, and they'll get better. But in terms of you know, sporting events, restaurants, there's you could never have told, and so New York is a place that people want to be, always want to be, and therefore we got a big leg up. There are cities that will come back, but way slower, and then others that will not come back to where they were.
Why do you think that New York is going to come back? Just because it has, right?
No, because I listen again. I think it's a magic place. I mean, and I know people who have transplanted here from European cities or fine American cities, and they just I want to be back in New York. I mean, I don't know what the pixie dust is. I've been here a long time, and my grandparents lived in Manhattan. I mean, which was unusual. They moved from Brooklyn when I was tiny, and this city sort of has some magic pixie dust to it, and so I'm betting on the magic pixie dust, but it looks like a pretty good bet already. I mean, look, I don't want to say I'm a retail expert. I've done thousands of retail leases and deals, and so
I would say that makes you an expert. If not that, what?
yeah, I mean, and now you see what's going on. Things got really leased up over the last year and a half, the vacancies. Now, when you looked at who they were being leased to, these were not the same people they'd be leased to before.
Right.
You saw, you need to go to a MediQuick, man. There's one on every other corner
Right.
because these are tenants that a landlord wouldn't have paid the price 7 years ago, on Third Avenue, prime Third Avenue space, but now and vets and so the ownerships did the right thing, man. You fill the boxes, heads and beds. But now I see there's much more discerning issues going on, and you're starting to see Madison Avenue fill up almost filled the vacancies with high-end retailers, just like were there before. So it's not just fill the box anymore. And so I think that's a great sign, because that's people putting their money where their mouth is, paying tremendous amounts of rent, and because they think the peeps are back, and it is the case.
Yeah, and this was made exceptionally clear by the chief of Morgan Stanley and some other people who were some other heads of state and financial services who were rather crassly saying, if you can go out to an expensive meal, you can get to the office.
Well, I know who you're referring to. I was on a conference call with that person when, a very exclusive conference call a year and a half into the pandemic. And this person was anecdotally telling that, he and his wife would go out to Tony restaurants on the Upper East Side where I'd see them on occasion. And he was curious why he'd see lots of his senior people at dinner, but couldn't come to the office.
Right.
We all understood what was like. This was no game, no secret. I mean, and commutation became an issue for people. It never was for 25 years. And I commuted for a while, and I didn't find it particularly pleasant, so I understood. But the fear of the illness and COVID itself, that ran 15, 18 months. And that was, and I got it. And I was super careful, and we had to be super careful in the building. By the 2-year mark, a lot of the holdouts were not holding out because they were afraid to get on a train or whatever. It's just that, so we had to deal with each one of those situations individually. But now you see, the big players dealing with it in a more macro way than they did for the first few years. And so I think we're coming to a tail end of that. But there were always people that worked from home. Let's be clear about that. 25 years ago, I had 10% of my office staff working from home because it made sense. It was not an issue. It wasn't particularly controversial. They were coders and things like that. It was great. No problem. So that happened. That did happen. And that's fine. But again, the ones that needed hallway space and be able to sort of go into a meeting and say what's on your mind rather than be on a Zoom call with 100 people. Not, it inhibited free flow and thought. And I used to tell people most of the decisions I made were done ad hoc in a hallway where someone come up and say, Mr. Galin, could I talk with you about something that we did in that meeting? And that doesn't happen when you're on with 90 people. No one says, I'll circle back with you. That doesn't happen. Right. So yes, I think between the people coming back to work, the res vacancy rate is just down to almost nothing. The rents are back where they were. I can personally tell you that. Yeah. So between all of that and the New York pixie dust, I walked up here 6 blocks from my office just now. I don't make it a habit to walk through Times Square often, not because of fear or anything. It's the Mickeys and stuff. And so, but I did walk, and I couldn't tell it wasn't Times Square, 2015, mobbed with tourists. And so I just think this place has an attraction to people that it's hard to explain sometimes.
Well, you're selling New York pixie dust at CFA Society New York, so we're buying.
I have a whole jar.
but in all seriousness, thank you, Scott, for being here on the podcast. And thanks to you all for listening. I hope this has been illuminating about some of the ways that the news services and other things are kind of exaggerating some things and missing others. So thank you all for listening to this podcast. Until next time on Compound Insights, I'm Rob Rowan.